in a minute. But the topic is what product leaders need to know about DevOps. And DevOps is certainly a very relevant, top of mind topic for a lot of people. And as product managers, product leaders, it's very important for us to understand, know what DevOps is all about, and more importantly, how do we organizationally work with each other to deliver the right products to our customers. So that's what we're going to hear about. So welcome once again. A quick introduction to the Institute of Product Leadership, a global business school for technology and product innovators. And we offer a variety of programs all the way from an executive MBA in product leadership, which is the first of its kind in the world, an 18-month campus-based program that we deliver in partnership with universities, to a certificate program, 20 weeks long, and 3-day workshops. And we've been very fortunate to work with a lot of people from many different companies across the world, and really look forward to growing the product leader community. Just to some logistics in terms of how do you access the content of this webinar and other events that you might attend. Feel free to register for our continuous learning and access program, CLAP. You can go to the website productleadership.com/clap and sign up, and you get an education account, a Google Drive storage, and all the content for all the events that you attend, webinars, some other events that we do in person. You'll be able to access the content for all those events. For one webinar attendee today, we are going to give out a book, The Phoenix Project. It's a book about DevOps and how do we work closely with the rest of the organization that's also involved in building and shipping products. Rajesh recommends this book very highly, so we're very pleased to give one copy of this book to one attendee. And so we'll see who that is towards the end. But in order to qualify, love to have you engage, interact, ask a lot of questions, tweet, and show your engagement as part of this webinar. You can type your questions in the chat window or also tweet to @ProdLeader with the hashtag ProdEvents. Now, without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our executive guest speaker today, Rajesh Raja. He's the VP of Product Management for API Management Business Unit at CA. He is a veteran of over 25 years in the technology industry, been in significant roles across different parts of the organizations, from engineering to product management, and he speaks a lot on this topic, so we're very fortunate to have him here today. Prior to CA, Rajesh worked at Oracle in various leadership roles. So without further ado, Rajesh, welcome to the webinar, and thanks for taking your time to share your expertise and share your thoughts on this very important topic of DevOps. So we will pass the control to you and look forward to your presentation. There we go.
Okay, are you able to see the screen or the presenter view?
Yes, we are able to see the screen.
Okay. Okay, thanks Rahul for that introduction. I have already received a lot of LinkedIn requests and invites from a lot of the participants here, and in fact some of you sent me some of your decks that you are using internally within your organization to promote DevOps or to work with your management on DevOps. So it's a pleasure to come and speak on this topic here. When Rahul and I initially spoke of this, I was not really sure whether this kind of a topic would in fact be needed from a product management perspective, given that I was struggling to even get engineers as well as architects to even fill in this kind of a role. So product management was not even on my mind. But as I went through some of the work that I have done in the past around the DevOps area, it kind of became apparent, and getting your requests and these decks that you've been forwarding to me only proves that this is an area that needs to have a further discussion with the PM. So I've had the in the recent years, that I have worked in the enterprise space, I've had the opportunity to lead a cloud engineering team. Some may even call it a Devops team, to deliver public cloud services from the ground up for the one of the largest software companies. This gave me insights into the kind of work and implementation challenges that are required in DevOps, which I then later brought into my current company, which is CA Technologies, to lead the technology strategy for building these DevOps products as well as open source offerings. So the one thing that I found interesting, in fact, over the last few years, as I retrospected after the conversation to have this webinar, was that there has always been a lack of deep product management involvement when it comes to DevOps. So, here is what product managers typically hear when you talk about DevOps. There is tools, there are more tools, there is continuous this, continuous that. You'll hear Netflix coming up, interestingly, and that somehow always shows up whenever you type DevOps in there. And then, of course, you hear even more tools. And this is why I believe DevOps often gets relegated to developers and operations, with product managers ignoring it so that they can focus on their functional use cases. But that also ends up keeping the product managers out of the loop when it comes to solving some key business problems that DevOps was aimed at, which is to improve business agility with IT. So before we get into what is DevOps, let's address the why do we need DevOps. So studies have shown that more than 90% of organizations cannot really deliver an idea into working software in less than 3 months. Now, that's an eternity in competitive markets. I mean, think about mobile applications. Like, how many customers would wait 3 months for that next release of their favorite apps? Even SAP, just recently, earlier this week, they announced a partnership with Apple. And they promised a 3-month or less cycle time for their iOS mobile apps, saying that enterprise customers would not settle for less. So that means that there is a realization that even large enterprise customers cannot be taken for granted. So what are the issues why we are not able to deliver the kind of velocity that customers need? So first, there is friction that happens during development. There is a lot of friction that comes in the form of dependencies that happen across different teams. There is lack of environments that are needed in the software development process. For example, you might be depending on a huge SAP system that may not be always available to you. There is a lack of general tooling knowledge and very complex handoff processes and ceremonies to move software from one stage to another, from development to QA. And there's also a lot of rework that is caused by errors that are found very, very late in the game that causes the entire process to start all over again and further reduces velocity. Second, you have a lot of risk that operations takes in the form of ensuring that there is security against data leaks or vulnerabilities. We've been hearing that in the news very lately, but there's also other issues around keeping the system up and running, having 24/7 monitoring, doing software upgrades, making sure that your system never goes down. So removing all these frictions and risks that are involved in moving an idea into from conception to commercialization is why DevOps is really needed. So then let's talk about what is DevOps. So DevOps is really an organizational culture that emphasizes very close collaboration all the way from development to operations, with the goal of rapidly delivering high quality, highly resilient software at web scale. Now, a whole industry has mushroomed to develop automation tools around DevOps, which are definitely all useful, but notice that the definition is not about tools, it's about the culture. So just like how Agile is not about doing Agile, it's actually about being Agile. Similarly, DevOps is not really about doing DevOps with all the toolings that you will find. It's actually about practicing the art and the culture of DevOps. So, when you talk about culture, it's very generic. So let's go into a very concrete definition of, what is that culture? So here is an explanation of that culture that has really resonated with me over the years. Even though it has some naughty words in it, but basically what it means is that all aspects of the software and systems that a customer sees or experiences is your responsibility, period. No more excuses of it works on my machine or backups are not my concern. We have an administrator to take care of that, or we have a different team that does performance testing. No, the buck stops with you. Everything that a customer sees or experiences is now your concern. Now that's a big responsibility, and it's the reason why just having tools is not enough. There is an entire mindset shift that is needed along with the tools. So to learn more about this, let's get into some basic patterns that can help understand the different components that are involved in DevOps. So in software development, code moves through various stages in its life cycle. It goes from generally development to test to stage to production. Every company has their own different set of stages. You may have a lot more or less. You may have performance testing, penetration testing, compliance checks, but basically the pattern remains the same. So there are a few patterns that we will talk about. The first is continuous integration. Now, continuous integration is where developers code multiple features in parallel. And then you periodically synchronize a working copy of that code into a shared repository, which you then periodically compile and test to make sure that your product is not broken. And so to achieve this pattern, you will see tools like Jenkins, TeamCity, and Travis. I'm just going to show logos of one of the tools that is an open source thing. So Jenkins is a pretty popular tool that is used for continuous integration. The next pattern is continuous delivery. So it extends continuous integration with an orchestration pipeline, which is a set of workflows that takes the output of your continuous integration and then moves it through the different stages and executes the deployment instructions and the tasks that need to be executed on each stage. For example, you might want to run some tests in your QA environment. And as soon as the test is successful, you might want to tag your source control, or you might want to upload the deployment files onto the cloud for other people to download. So the final deployment of this particular continuous delivery is manual. So you don't just automatically let everything go into production. You have somebody who will push a button, and only then the software actually goes into production. The same tools that are used in continuous delivery also could help in continuous integration, could also help in continuous delivery, but there are other dedicated tools for this purpose as well. Now, I talked about the manual deployment part, which is having somebody push a button. So there is a pattern called continuous deployment, which essentially automates that last step. And so it's the same as continuous delivery. So when you hear continuous deployment, it just means that it'll take the software all the way to production after the last stage has been successfully tested. So, as you can imagine, this is an advanced pattern which is not for the faint of heart. It brings up tons of other issues, but it does have its value, and we can go over that if anybody is interested. Continuous testing is a pattern that's all about reducing the testing bottlenecks by virtualizing services. So we call that more of a shift-left philosophy, in that you perform integration testing early on in the development lifecycle with tools that can simulate these end systems. So, if you have this SAP system that you will not have available 24/7, you virtualize that, and you have request response pairs that are recorded, so that even when the system is not available, you can actually continue development, you can continue testing as well behind the scenes. So example tools that do that, CA has one of the market-leading tools in this space, service virtualization, but you have a lot of open source tools like TestDoubles and Mountebank that you could use for this purpose. Configuration management is a pattern wherein the environment is treated as configuration. So your entire environment, whether it's the Linux box, whether it's the software that is installed on the Linux box, the network settings to go with that, and whatever the software that you need to install in terms of databases, application servers, libraries, they are all version controlled in a text format, in a text file literally, that you can put into a source control like Git, and then if you execute on that, it can allow you to provision identical copies of that entire set of environments. So with one click, I can get this entire application up and running. This pattern is also sometimes referred to as infrastructure as code. And so the tools that you would see in this space, you may have heard of some of them, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, but there are new technologies now that are coming up that are even replacing those, things like Docker, Kubernetes, Cloud Foundry, and so on. The other concept or pattern to know about is lifecycle management, and this is all about automating all the activities after your app is in production. So this involves system maintenance, patching and upgrades, backup and recovery, management, monitoring, diagnostics, error resolution, elasticity, scaling up, scaling down, SLAs, and so on. And so this is an important aspect when it comes to automation and DevOps. So I like to use analogies. And so my favorite analogy on this is, imagine you're building a plane. You're building an airplane, something like the A380. So you have, different portions of the plane being built by different divisions. Somebody's working on the fuselage, somebody's working on the wings, others are working on the engine and the tail, but everybody works in parallel and periodically puts together the prototype of all these things working together to ensure that everything is in proportion with each other. Your wing is not too small for the fuselage and so on. So you kind of bring things together very, very periodically. And the faster you bring that together, the earlier you can discover if some things are not right, and you can always go back and fix that, as opposed to in the end you have this one big plane that has tiny wings and you know that it's just not going to fly. So this is CI, this is continuous integration. Once the plane prototypes are ready, and however many prototypes you create, it has to pass through a series of checks in different environments. Those environments might be virtual, but it might also, in fact, involve your QA people who might actually be testing it as a real user. So in this case, you might actually want to take that prototype out for a test flight. And so this is continuous delivery. That same prototype goes through different stages of that life cycle. Continuous testing is when you actually realize that, well, instead of sending that plane up in the air every time to check whether the wings can hold up to the wind shear, it might actually be better and faster and safer to test the wings in a wind tunnel, and rather than to have the plane sent to the air all the time. So now you have shifted left that concept of testing for failures early on. The configuration management would be a repeatable set of instructions here that you can build the infrastructure that is required for the plane. So if that specific plane requires a different type of runway, it requires a huge set of terminals, it requires different sets of the trolleys that come on board, or the walkways to the aircraft, which is possible for a plane like the super jumbo A380, which does require specific infrastructure. You can now put that in a repeatable set of instructions that you can give to every airport in the world, and then they can basically just repeat that. That's essentially the equivalent of configuration management. Lifecycle management would be the just-in-time repairs that you could potentially communicate to the airport even while the plane is in flight, so that it could be done as soon as the plane lands. You know exactly the 3 different repair items you need to take care of, thereby decreasing the time that the plane is out of service instead of doing like the big approach towards repairs. And finally, continuous deployment would ship the plane to the airlines as soon as the final flight is successful. Now, again, this might sound really risky for a plane, and you might think it's even crazy to push software into production this way, but there are companies that do this successfully, and there are reasons why there are real benefits to this approach. But yes, it does require a significant amount of maturity and automation to enable this. So as I mentioned, that's not for the faint of heart. So now you might be wondering, all this is all systems level stuff. How does it really impact my product management role? So let's start with the benefits of what DevOps can give you. So DevOps can really help solve the friction and risk problems that we discussed earlier. So you can deliver products faster with DevOps. When we discuss the different patterns, configuration management can get you complete live environments with the click of a button. And believe me, once you get this, and once you get used to the kind of speed with which you can quickly get your own environments, instead of having to wait weeks or months for somebody in the IT team to give this to you, you can never go back. Continuous integration gives you new feature demos rapidly. Within days of you maybe putting it on your backlog and your development team quickly churning on it without impacting the production customers, without impacting or breaking anything else. Continuous delivery then further reduces that time for that feature functional demo to now start getting into different stages of the life cycle and then in the hands of customers where you can quickly receive real feedback from customers. So this really gives you that business agility that you're looking for. You can also make your products better with DevOps. Continuous testing gives you higher quality that increases your customer satisfaction and NPS scores, and also can help you lower your customer churn, whether it's the number of customers or the revenue that can get impacted with it. And here's the bonus. It's not just about increasing or making things better, but it also allows you to reduce the rework that is required when errors are found late in the game. And so it can also then help prevent employee burnout, which can then further decrease error rates and improve the cycle time. So it kind of gets into a cyclical loop where your product actually starts getting better over time. DevOps can also help make your products cheaper to operate. So automation is the key here. By automating the simple but complex administrative tasks, so these are routine, but at the same time, they are complex to administer. You eliminate the need for customers to hire an army of sysadmins for things like patching or backup. I mean, backup is simple, but at the same time, the task of doing the backups is so complex that sometimes there's a lot of errors in the picture. Upgrades, I mean, applying a simple patch is an extremely simple process, but organizations dread taking updates for major pieces of software just because there is so much of downtime that is involved. So this is where this is one of the key benefits of SaaS, for example. This is the value proposition of SaaS, which is to take away all this pain of administration. But you can apply this even for on-premise today. So it reduces also the burden on engineering teams, especially when it comes to diagnostics and eliminating this whole back and forth sessions with customers when something goes wrong for days. If you have automation, you can reduce this burden on your engineering teams. And automation can also help with migrating to newer technologies without impacting the customer. So tomorrow, if you're today delivering virtual machines and you have this 100% automated, you can easily migrate to something like Docker containers tomorrow without impacting the customers. And finally, DevOps can also help make your product safer. You reduce the risk of failure by releasing smaller features more often using continuous delivery. You can, in fact, further reduce that risk by anticipating errors earlier through advanced analytics, like what happens if a deployment of a particular UI module has historically spiked bug rates. Well, in the next deployment cycle, you should flag those additional checks for that UI module because you know they have caused errors in the past. And when things do go wrong, and they will for sure, then configuration management and lifecycle automation helps reduce that downtime for the customers by allowing you to recover these applications faster. So these are the benefits that you can get as a product manager from DevOps. And these are not just theoretical benefits. A yearly state of the DevOps report, which is pushed by Puppet, shows that DevOps-ready organizations do really dramatically reduce failures, they recover faster, and they deploy new software significantly faster than the organizations that don't do DevOps. And another study of IT executives, which was also sponsored by CA, full disclosure, it basically showed that you have an almost 50% improvement in overall speed to market, quality, employee productivity, as well as the NPS and customer satisfaction scores. But then you can argue, these are all both DevOps tool vendors, so they have an inherent bias in basically saying that, here are the benefits, but let's look at some real street level proof points. You just have to do a Google search or go to YouTube and just search on DevOps capabilities or DevOps success stories. And you'll see examples of web scale companies like, Google, Netflix, Facebook, all these companies that you see here, all releasing using DevOps principles. Software tends to hundreds of times a day. Netflix is a poster child, especially for DevOps and microservices, and they have, in fact, released a complete suite of tools as open source. For the Oracle Public Cloud Services, where I led the DevOps team, software that previously took days, if not weeks, for customers to install, and that too using an army of DBAs and sysadmins, we turned that using DevOps toolchains and patterns into fully provisioned cloud tenant environments that could be stood up within minutes. applying patches and upgrades that again was a dreaded operation with a lot of downtime involved, in that DevOps world became a user-friendly banner that used to apply, that used to come up on the user interface, and then the user used to just click the button and get these upgrades applied whenever they wanted to. So again, just in a way that you would expect in any SaaS environment with near zero downtime. So those are the real benefits that are there with DevOps. But it's not about all these unicorns and cloud platform vendors. There's an article that you can read on the Guardian blogs. They moved from bi-monthly releases to doing 24,000 deployments per year, and they have in fact commented on in that article, how this feedback that they've been receiving has been transformative to the business. So I would strongly advise reading this blog post. Closer to home, I can give you examples of our own CA technology customers. Telefonica is a telecom provider in Chile, improved time to market by 15% using some of our continuous testing tools that we have. DHL improved time to market, and also improved their quality metrics by automating not only just that release aspects, but they in fact went a step further and took that automation concept to heart with the lifecycle management as well. There's another telecom company that saves approximately $1 million or so every year in QA costs by virtualizing some of the services instead of having all these large applications up and running all the time. And so they anticipate saving, again, around 5% or so of their QA budget yearly. Customers, the telecom customers like Orange, they've utilized lifecycle automation and management and monitoring capabilities of DevOps to reduce the time it takes to identify where the errors are, the root cause analysis, and they've reduced that time by 40%. And again, there are other examples like this. You can read, where outages could have been reduced by 20% just by identifying what could have caused them. And there are, these are just the customers that I can name. There are a lot of other customers I've worked with where we don't have public references, so I can't name them. But there's a big financial institution that uses our continuous testing and continuous deployment tools for doing up to 5,000 deployments a month. And again, this is not a unicorn. This is a large financial institution, and they reduced their test cycles going from 3 days to 10 minutes. There's another large bank in Europe which reduced their time to market from 5 months to 4 days. There's a large electronics retailer who thinks their products are the best buys ever. Reduced their test environment setup time by almost 90% using these continuous testing tools, and they were able to deliver functional services in 2 to 3 days, what used to earlier take them 4 to 6 weeks. So as you can see, the gains are dramatic when you use DevOps. So, and I'm sure a lot of you, given what I've even heard from what your decks are and what you're trying to propose to management, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. And so if you get that, let's see what needs to get done to actually use DevOps or contribute to DevOps as a product leader. So what can you do when things really go faster with DevOps? So with continuous integration, think about how you can do continuous experimentation with developers on feature branches. Can you really move fast enough? Can you put your stories in the backlog fast enough? And to do that, you need to start breaking down those stories so that instead of having large epics all the time, you actually have stories that are slated for that release in those particular sprints. So again, you need to start being more agile to be able to do this kind of continuous experimentation, and then set up the feedback chain with customers or with some key stakeholders. So again, you have to be ready as a product leader to be able to do that. How do you handle features that are not yet ready? So you have so many features. If you have thousands of deployments a month, there are going to be features that are in flight or in development that are not going to be complete. Well, how are you going to handle that? So start thinking about patterns such as feature toggles. And again, this is not in the scope of this webinar, and there's no way we can even continue talking about every one of these patterns that I'm going to talk about. So do some research, and hopefully we'll work on some additional training or webinars on each of these kind of patterns. But do some research on some of these very well-known patterns that can help you acclimatize to this world of DevOps. So feature toggles is a great one to understand as a product leader when thinking about the different features that you would want to release, which might be in flight. You also heard about the examples where companies are deploying thousands of times a month. Well, that's easy to do with software. It's just bits and bytes that you move from one place to another. But can your go-to-market really keep up? Right? You need to really have that discipline in the organization, which is again where the cultural mindsets come into the picture, which is, you cannot really change your user experience drastically between these multiple releases. So imagine what Netflix would have to do if they have this black background and the icons of all the movies on one day, and then the next day you see a red background, and from square you get into round icon, and the third day they have triangular icons. I mean, you would just get tired as a user. And then this is just a consumer application. On the enterprise applications, you might have a sales force or an employee workforce that you would have to retrain, and that can cost millions. So as a product leader, when you have to keep up with your go-to-market activities, you need to make sure that there is some discipline around, not changing the UIs, keeping the APIs backward compatible, updating the documentation in an agile manner, how you can enable your support, training, partner enablement, pre-sales, demos, all these things you need to keep in mind. So start thinking of how you are able or how you're going to do that. And again, there are best practices that organizations have followed to be able to get to this stage and maturity in DevOps. What can you do to make DevOps and your products better? So help your developers, shift left, which is it requires them to do testing early on in the life cycle. So think about, how you would utilize these tools for virtualizing services and using API level abstraction so that you can simulate these end systems so that you don't need them up on the time. Things like SAP or even cloud services like Salesforce.com, they are available 24/7, but they are expensive. They have limitation on the number of APIs that you can consume in a per hour basis. So it's not always feasible to assume that just because it's a service on the cloud and it's cheap that you can actually have them running 24/7. It doesn't become cheap when you try to do that. And remember the airplane analogy. Think about how you can build a wind tunnel for your team instead of always sending your airplane up in the air with every prototype. Second, getting continuous feedback from customers also means that your organization itself needs to be agile. And again, I don't mean doing agile, but being agile to continuously deliver value with every sprint. So you can no longer now have your sprints wherein your stories are basically feature part 1, and then the next sprint has feature part 2. I mean, that doesn't work anymore. You actually need to truly be agile where true business value and earned value is being earned with every sprint. And then you also need to be agile to be able to adapt to the feedback that you would get back from the customers. So remember, building the wrong product faster, better, cheaper is still wrong. So this is where, again, you as a product leader can really matter to DevOps. You need to adapt to the agile nature and requirement of DevOps in order to deliver the value and receive the feedback. And finally, to delight the customer, ensure that all the product management needs to own what is called as non-functional requirements, which otherwise don't usually end up getting the same level of importance. And when talking about non-functional requirements, my view is that there are no non-functional requirements. Everything is functional. Product management typically associates functional requirements with what we see. So if there is a big blue button on the screen or an icon, then it's functional. But non-functional requirements are about what we experience, which is if a page loads slowly, or if a system is not available, we treat that as an operations or a performance problem. It's not our problem, but remember that cultural definition, it all is your problem if it is anything about what a customer sees or experiences, because this really has a huge value on the experience that the customer gets. Studies have shown, and you can see here on one of the blog posts, that every second that a page doesn't load increases the chances that your customer will abandon your service. And in other cases, if you actually have an e-commerce type of site, every second that the page loads slowly means a monetary consequence to you, which could result in millions of dollars of sales per year. So it's absolutely critical that product management owns and fully owns the non-functional requirements and tries to turn it into functional requirements so that you can actually delight the customer with much better software. So each of the non-functional requirements you see here, these are operational choices that typically have been made by another division, another group, but these all have product consequences. So validate them as you go along. If your operations folks have chosen a particular user experience around how tenants are signed up, especially if you're a SaaS service, or how upgrades are applied, even if it's an on-premise service, that has an impact on that first-time user experience that your customer does when they first sign up or when they first start installing your service. So, make wise choices on these non-functional requirements. Product level choices also, on the reverse, have operational consequences. One example I remember when I was onboarding a public cloud service was that there was this team that actually wanted to keep large amounts of logging data. This was an XML data that was being output, and the customers could utilize that for doing diagnostics. And they were storing this in a database for an extended period of time, and they wanted to continue doing that same pattern on the cloud. Now, on the cloud, the expenses for a reliable database storage that gets synchronized across various availability zones and different cross-region data sync was costing them almost double of what the competitors were charging for the entire service. So now this was clearly a wrong product choice, because such decisions have an adverse impact on your viability of your service as a business. So, and especially in the SaaS world, because in the on-premise world, we would have not cared because it was the customer's responsibility to hire those DBAs. In fact, the more database we sold, the better it was, right? But in this case, you own that service, you run that service, you have full responsibility of what they see or experience. And in this case, the experience wasn't good. So just remember this, that operational choices have product consequences, and vice versa. Product choices also have operational consequences. So what can you do to make things cheaper? Look at the best practice implementation. Start learning about some of these best practices, and it may be a little bit on the engineering side, but product needs to know about them, especially when you're talking about consumer applications and SaaS applications. If you're working on any of those, you need to understand patterns like circuit breakers, self-healing patterns, call home functionalities. This can dramatically reduce cost for both the customer and for your own engineering team to maintain their sanity when something does go wrong. Again, explaining the patterns is beyond the scope and time and what we have today, but do some research on this, because this has a big impact on user experience. So I in fact consider this as functional as you can still get in these non-functional requirements. Some automation items will require some technology debt to get fixed, or maybe new architectural spikes might need to be created in your backlogs. So do factor that in when you plan your next sprint. And finally, most lifecycle automation stories are ones that will provide you with the maximum operational cost benefits, as we saw in the last slide. And while some of these are categorized under these non-functional requirements, as I have recommended earlier, there is no such thing as these non-functional requirements. Prioritize them as functional stories. So instead of calling something the call home feature, for example, prioritize it as a story that would read something like, as a customer, upon any error, I would like the system to auto zip up all the relevant log files in the system and create a support ticket so that I don't have to spend days going back and forth with the vendor to resolve the issue. That's a non-functional requirement converted into a functional user story. And if you tell that to any customer, or if you tell that to your sales folks, I can guarantee you nobody would say no to that feature. And it, in fact, can reduce the cost and increase the viability of your service. What can you do to make your product safer? Get comfortable with failures. Get comfortable with failures, not just the unintentional ones, but the ones that are intentional. And in fact, I would highly recommend engineering failures. So use tools like Netflix has this really good tool called Simian Army that they themselves use. Simian Army or Chaos Monkey, they have different terms for the different components of this tool, will actually go and randomly kill your production servers to force you to make your system more robust enough. And Netflix, by the way, does that. They continuously test this by killing their own servers and seeing if performance still degrades. And this was one of the reasons when AWS, the Amazon Web Services on which Netflix is based, when they went down a few years ago, most of the sites on the internet went down, but Netflix still ran. because they completely switched over based on their testing that they had done with this tooling into a completely different region that was not affected. So yes, this is scary at first, but if you don't kill your servers randomly, something else will, and it will happen. Another way to get engineered failures is participate in game days. Practice incident management and response techniques along with your ops and engineering teams when the things do go wrong. So just be prepared for that. Second, we've covered this a little bit earlier, but you need to be truly agile and make your releases smaller. One of the biggest risk items is, in fact, not doing agile, because big bang releases typically increase the risk of more things going wrong dramatically. And finally, adopt a systems level thinking to ensure that automation that is needed is present to mitigate that risk of failure. So what happens when you perform or when you put a patch in the middle of a night? Will the system auto roll back that patch if that patch fails without requiring now a developer to wake up in the middle of the night to create an emergency patch? So think about all these risk mitigation strategies and how you can use automation. So that's essentially what I wanted to share. To summarize, the three important things to take back is, DevOps is more about the culture. It is really not so much about the tools. DevOps can help you build your products faster, better, cheaper, and safer. And product leaders really do play an important role in DevOps and to help build the right products that can allow you to delight your customers. I'll leave you with one more parting thought, because this is a quote that I really love from Jez Humble, who's the father of the term continuous delivery or continuous deployment as well to some extent. DevOps is all about putting people closer to the consequences of their action. And what you can read what he says over there, but essentially, whether the product manager defines as a product or a feature, whatever the developer builds that product, whatever the QA tests, whatever the release engineer ships, whatever the ops person puts into production, the consequence of that set of actions is felt by the customer as an experience. And therefore, product management needs to get closer to those consequences all the way from the conceptualization of that product through to the operations, not just the functional requirements, but also that non-functional requirements and systems level thinking. And that is DevOps. So, I know you must be tired by now about hearing about all these non-functional requirements and DevOps. So I'll leave you with a few DevOps resources. Phoenix Project is a great book that Rahul mentioned as well, and there's a whole bunch of different books that I would strongly recommend that if you're getting into DevOps and wanting to learn more, you can read. I've put in links to some of the open source software that is available on the left for you to take, or for your engineering teams to take and do the DevOps, as well as on the right-hand side, these are CA commercial tools that are available. If you want to learn more about it, ca.com/DevOps has a lot of collateral and material. And yes, we are hiring as well. So, if you are looking for DevOps roles, especially in Vancouver, that's where my team is located, do feel free to go into ca.com and check out the roles.
Hey, Rajesh, thanks a lot. That was a wonderful talk, a lot of information packed in less than an hour. And thanks for taking us through all the different aspects of DevOps, including the why, the how, and what. We have a lot of questions that have come in, and so let me just see how many we can get to. As always, you can always go to the LinkedIn group and share your questions there if we can't get to everything that you can see. But let's go through the questions and get to as many as we can. So you talked about Agile, and there were some comparisons that you showed in terms of how DevOps increases the efficiency beyond Agile. So how is DevOps different from Agile, or does DevOps help an organization become more agile? If you can talk about that.
Yeah, so absolutely. DevOps, I think it's the reverse way. Again, in my opinion, DevOps doesn't make your organization become more agile. Agile is a requirement for you to do DevOps efficiently. So, yes, you can always use continuous integration and continuous delivery tooling and just use the tools aspect of it. But, unless and until you really get familiar with the agile concepts and are able to put that into practice by releasing software more often, by having quick releases, a lot of the fundamental tenets of DevOps cannot really be achieved. And that's why you saw in that slide that there is initially the benefits that you can get with Agile, and then you get further benefits if you actually combine Agile together with DevOps to now change the mindset and thinking around what the experience could be and how you own everything from a customer's perspective and not let anything, basically it's all about the communication and collaboration to get the customer a really good experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Rajesh, you talked a lot about how product managers need to, embrace a different mindset, change their thinking about owning the entire experience, not just the functional and the, but also the non-functional. But, where do we start? And where do we start? To what extent do we need to be involved in terms of, the tools and the technologies? So, can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I take, and I've seen some of the material that some of the folks here on the call also sent me, and some of them had a lot of good stuff in there that they've been proposing to their organization, and some of it also referred to things like methodologies and maturity models and the likes of those. And frankly, I do not subscribe to that thinking. So the way I have seen DevOps being successful is, number one, as a product manager, there will be some ramp up because these are brand new tools, technologies, concepts, and philosophies. So get familiar with all these, the cultural concepts as well as some of the tooling. You don't need to necessarily start coding in the toolings, but you need to know what it is there for and why. After you get familiar with the tooling, familiarize yourself with the value chain of your product delivery cycle. Identify the pain points. Do you have poor quality releases? Are customers not buying the product because of constant comparisons with the competition? Do your releases take too long? Where do you really see the issues in your value chain? And start to identify things that you could potentially make better. And then commit to some sort of a tool set. And I'm not just saying any kind of commercial tool set. Start with something. Identify a small project that you can then showcase that success with. So don't try to boil the ocean with this whole methodology, right? You cannot just be successful completely by boiling the ocean with DevOps. It's actually called practicing DevOps. Just like yoga, you're never going to get an expert at it. You will be practicing the art of DevOps. So, start with maybe a project that requires an automated delivery to reduce the time that it takes to release the software, or start with virtualizing the services early on and shifting your developers more towards that left. Start building that wind tunnel so you can show that the quality is starting to become better. So start with these small projects to get started rather than doing some kind of a big bang, large program level projects.
Great. So, you talked about the aspect of, making the case for DevOps with senior management. Is that, in some way related to what you said about, starting somewhere, starting small, establish the proof points, or are there other, ways that we need to think about making the case for DevOps?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are, starting with a small project is definitely the right way, but I think that's the right way to get started yourself as a product manager. When you talk to executive management to try to convince them about DevOps, first and foremost, focus on the right goal. It's easy to sometimes get seduced by, like the presentations or the tools and technologies. Yes, you can triple your deployments using a continuous delivery tools, but if quality is your main issue, you'll now just be releasing 3 times the amount of bad code that you used to do previously, right? So in that case, focus on quality improvements first using continuous testing instead. So, so figure out the right thing that you want to focus on. And secondly, once you have identified the right thing, don't stress the technology benefit. Focus on the business value when making the case to executive management. So explain how, say, tripling the deployments will help get your products to customers faster and how much that feedback is going to help improve the products. Get some proof points of your customer experience today, with non-functional requirements. So today, if you're having downtime or latency, and if you think you can make a dent in that by making that better, quantify that in the cost of savings to the organization. So, if a particular downtime costs you $2 million in either wasted engineering resources who are struggling to fix that issue, lost opportunity costs because of new features that you were not able to get done because your engineers were busy fixing that issue, lost customer revenues of customers who unsubscribe to your service or impact to your brand, for example, quantify that, and suddenly the investment in DevOps would actually look a lot cheaper compared to what you just went through.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, Rajesh, because as you talked about, linking the non-functional requirements to some business objective and outcome, that obviously, gets the attention of senior management, because now, the product manager is in the middle talking language, sort of translating and talking the languages on both sides, right, in terms of the business outcomes and impacts, as well as what the technology can enable, or how it can enable. Super.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
I think you need to start educating the stakeholders really also, on what is DevOps. Just like how we've gone through this session, I think a lot of product leaders and in fact executives have heard about this term, but again they might have just heard about it from the tooling perspective, not the culture. So again, convey the benefits that you just learned. How will you make your product, faster, better, cheaper, and safer? I think that's what they need to learn as well.
Yeah, great. So Rajesh, there are a few questions coming in around existing enterprise applications. So let me sort of combine them. So when we take, the existing applications or legacy applications that we've been delivering for, years in some cases, right? How do you recommend going about, adopting or shifting to DevOps for those applications? There's already an install base. There's already a set way of how do we deliver and develop these things. So, any thoughts, anything from your experience that relates to how do you bring this new culture and mindset to enterprise existing applications, legacy applications?
So I'll give you my experience, based on the example I took around the work that I did when leading the DevOps team for the Oracle Public Cloud Services. And I think, I mentioned these were legacy applications or legacy platforms. I know Oracle would probably hate to call it legacy platform because there are millions of customers using this, around the world today. But they took days, if not weeks, to install. Upgrades were a nightmare. And in fact, so when we use some of these DevOps principles to automate it, and we just took, say, one pattern, which was the configuration management and infrastructure as code, we turned that entire experience around for customers now who could just, click a button and deploy the entire service bus, the entire, SOA suite, the entire set of database that goes behind it, at a click of a button. The upgrades became extremely simple on the cloud. It was, again, just a click of the button. You choose if you want to accept the upgrade, what time you want to accept the upgrade, and then when you click it, the system goes down for a fraction of the time that it used to go down earlier. So with any of these legacy systems, if you don't have the opportunity to change the entire set of process, again, focus on what adds more value. And in fact, I think when we released the software, Larry Ellison, when he went on stage to introduce that, the way he introduced it was customers love to use our software. Customers hate to install and maintain our software, and that's what we're going to solve. And so that was his key value proposition that I would strongly recommend for the existing legacy system is, take that opportunity. You may have hundreds and thousands of customers who may be loving your software, but I can assure you that, if that's a legacy software that's, at least a decade old, or if not even newer than that, that they would probably be hating the management and monitoring and lifecycle management aspects. So if you can automate that, that would be a great start and a good point to take it forward with for DevOps.
Yeah, again, that's a good point, Rajesh, in terms of the experience that customers have, not just around using, but installation, deployment, provisioning, maintenance, and the whole aspect around how does that even begin to make an impact in the customer's environment.
Yep.
Great. Few questions here around scaling DevOps. Can you talk about that? Do we need to use different models like LSS or SAFe? How do you scale DevOps across the organization?
Yeah, well, there are different schools of thought around scaling DevOps, and even the person who created Agile was not particularly thrilled with even models like SAFe. And so there are always two schools of thought when it comes to how you can scale a particular methodology that seems to be working well for a small team, and how do you scale that up? Specifically, with DevOps not being so much related to the methodology as much as Agile is. It's a lot more about the culture and about the automation. I have not seen issues in terms of scaling DevOps per se. Now, there are patterns that I have tried. In fact, as an organization, we tried a lot to see whether we can centralize DevOps teams. Again, there are two schools of thoughts around that. Jez Humble, whose books I have strongly recommended, doesn't believe that centralizing these DevOps teams makes sense, because you want every developer or every person in the team to imbibe that culture and understand that what they build is what they run and they're responsible for it. So having a centralized team, again, creates yet another silo that is now not responsible and becomes yet another team. But on the other hand, if you're especially starting with a large organization and you don't have people who follow that culture and mindset, it may actually be better to have a separate team called a DevOps team, whose only responsibility might be to just introduce and evangelize this concept throughout the organization, and then set up common stack engineering teams who can create these tools and tool chains using the technologies that I mentioned, and then start to prove these projects almost as a service consultancy basis. So there are these multiple approaches that could work. DevOps being such a new phenomenon, especially on the enterprise level, and most of the companies who have done that previously were on the unicorn side, who were building brand new products, that the jury's still out on whether one approach would be working much better than the other. And again, I've tried both, and there are pros and cons to each approach.
Great. So Rajesh, there are a few questions around this whole theme about, does this sound too good to be true? So let me summarize them. So, when we're talking about this, shift or a DevOps-centric organization, what are some of the top challenges or obstacles or risks that we should anticipate, and how should we, go about mitigating them?
Yeah. So if somebody told you things can be made better, cheaper, faster, and safer, wherein prior knowledge pointed otherwise, or the fact that you can only have 2 out of those 3, yes, it does sound good to be true, but this doesn't come for free. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges when transforming from a traditional to a DevOps-centric organization. So first of all, DevOps literally requires Agile as a prerequisite. So a lack of an Agile culture and existence of, say, overly bureaucratic processes can kill DevOps. And so when it looks like all these benefits just look too good to be true, don't assume that just because you're doing Agile that you're actually Agile. So look at your own methodology honestly, and then see are you really practicing Agile. So that is one of the key challenges that I have seen with the DevOps adoption. The other is cultural resistance with the team. DevOps is a big mindset change when it comes to automating every possible thing. And so it's not the easiest to adapt, especially around those cultural aspects of, if you build it, you run it. A lot of the engineers in the team usually don't like some of these DevOps concepts. You might actually be thinking otherwise, that engineers would love all these different things, but they want to focus, just like product managers, they want to focus on the functional things. They want to focus on their own areas of competence, whether it is Node.js, whether it is Java, whether they're doing back-end really complex machine learning algorithms using multi-threaded code. The last thing you want, or they want to know, is how do I write a Python script, or how do I learn Ruby so that I can deploy that code? So there's a lot of resistance that you will encounter within the organization. And finally, I think it also requires a lot of investment in evangelization, in education of the stakeholders, as well as in the tooling that is available out there. So some of the tools that I mentioned, they're all free, they're all open source, but it doesn't mean that it comes cheap in terms of that education and the value that you get out of those tools. So you may have to then look at commercial tools to do a better job than what those open source tools can do. So it doesn't come cheap, but again, in the long run, not doing it is probably a lot more expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Yeah. And so, with any kind of a, initiative, technology shift or a trend, while there is a lot of organizational change and the mindset shift that needs to happen and the education and the evangelizing, like you said, how do we measure success? How do we say that, X number of days, weeks, months, or years down the road, um, we've been able to do this well?
So the success, as I mentioned earlier, there are some key, performance indicators that you need to identify. This needs to be your success criteria, your KPIs that you have identified by looking at your value chain through your process. And I think once you do that, you identify some key metrics, whether those metrics are lowering the bug count, increasing the customer adoption rate, reducing the amount of downtime that your customers experience, or going back to every one of those metrics in the faster, cheaper, better, safer. Is like how many releases did you have in a given week? What was the error rate of each and every one of those releases as the average bug count goes down with every release? Has your customer satisfaction numbers and NPS gone up with every release? I think these are the kind of metrics that you need to take. Similar to Agile, yes, there are enough metrics you could use in terms of cycle time and velocity, that would apply even to DevOps. But again, just the number of deployments should not be your metric. If you're looking at it from a DevOps perspective, the metric really has to point back to the business value that it has generated.
Great. And again, that goes back to how do we translate these non-functional requirements that we've been used to thinking of and translate them and convert them into some functional business impact, either for the business or for customers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So, hey, lots of questions here, Rajesh, but, I know respecting your time and everyone else's time, we are coming up on the hour of the webinar. So again, everyone, thanks for sending in your questions. I know we could not get to everything, but please feel free to share on our LinkedIn group, and we'll have Rajesh take a look at them and answer some of those questions as well. As promised, here's the winner for the book, The Phoenix Project, Srivalli Machiraju. Srivalli, thanks for your engagement and contributions with questions. The team will contact you and get your information to get you this copy of the book. All right. For a lot of others that asked the question about, hey, can you go back to that slide or show me these resources? We'll make these slides available as well as the recording of this webinar, so you can take a look at that at your leisure. I know Rajesh had a lot of different links to various different resources and blog posts, so you can take a look at them at your own pace. Stay in touch with the Institute and the other events coming up. We have a masterclass with Dr. Pawan Soni on March 18th. Professor Vasudev Murthy will be talking about making effective sales pitches at the IPL NASCOM workshop. And we have a couple of other webinars coming up in the areas of data science and creativity and ideation with Mandar Parikh, who's a VP of Product Management, as well as Professor Naveen Lakur. So a lot of stuff coming up down the pipe. So stay in touch with these events and hope to see you at one of them. Once again, Rajesh, thanks a lot for taking your time. And I know you have very busy with a lot of different initiatives and projects, and so thanks for sharing your expertise with us. And thanks to all of you for joining this webinar, and look forward to seeing you again.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thanks.